Good morning, and thanks for coming out. Thanks for having me back, Chris. It's really a pleasure to be here. I'm here with my colleague Olga Preston. Raise your hand, Olga. We work at Fairtrade USA, and we are in service to the industry around ethical and sustainable supply chains. And I'd like to get started by asking a few questions. First of all, who here comes from a retailer? Raise your hands. Awesome. And who here is from a manufacturer or supplier or grower? Beautiful. Thank you. Who here is from an organization that is in service or support to retailers and manufacturers? All right. Good deal. Who is working on responsible sourcing or ethical sourcing as part of your work right now? Two hands. Nice job. And who in the room feels frustrated on a regular basis with the pace of change? Right? Last question. Who here has felt a moment of inspiration with a project or the impact that you're having this year? So I think what we have all signed up to do is pretty crazy. In an economic environment like this, with so much uncertainty, with inflation, with disruption of all kinds, supply chain issues and everything, and with how hard that makes it just to run a successful business, we have also signed up to make those businesses more sustainable, to take care of the planet, to take care of people. And I think in doing that, we are challenging, implicitly, we are challenging the conventional wisdom in the business community, which I would characterize as a trade-off mentality. In the past, we were taught that the most important thing was to maximize profits for shareholders. And you could be profitable or you could be sustainable, but you couldn't be both. Or there was a trade-off there. You couldn't optimize for both. That trade-off mentality has characterized, I would argue, most of business thinking up until pretty recently. It is only, I would argue, in the last 5, 10, maybe 20 years that more and more companies are trying to go beyond the trade-off mentality of the past, are trying to find ways to bake sustainability and responsibility into the business model in a way that doesn't take away from profits. In fact, on the contrary, that drives the success of the firm. And I think this is a long-term transition. I don't think it's quick. I don't think it's easy. Bringing sustainability into the heart of the business and really living it in a way that creates value, not just for the environment, not just for people, but for the firm. That's a struggle that we have all signed up for. And the title of this talk, I don't know who gave me this title, but the title of this talk is Leading a Revolution. And I think what we've signed up to do is pretty revolutionary. It may not feel like it when in the trenches on our Zoom calls every day, on our spreadsheets every day, but I feel like we are, each and every one of you are part of a revolution in the way business works in search of a more sustainable model of business that doesn't rob our kids and our grandkids from the future that we all dream of for them. So it feels great to be in a room of kindred spirits. And so what I'd like to talk to a little bit, talk with you a little bit about today is fair trade as a model for ethical or responsible sourcing, which we see as a macro trend and part of this bigger trend of business with purpose. And I'd like to share a few of the lessons that we see in both the fair trade movement and beyond, and hopefully that'll be helpful for you. So I got my start at the tender age of 22 in responsible sourcing. My grandfather was a farmer in Oklahoma, he lost his farm during the Great Depression. And I never knew him. He died long before I was born, but I grew up hearing stories about life on the farm and how hard it was. And I was inspired by that and knew I always wanted to work with farmers. And so at the tender age of 22, fresh out of school, I got on a plane and went to Nicaragua with a chance to work with farmers there. And I went way up into the mountains and was working with farmers who were growing coffee and subsistence crops. I thought I would stay for a year or two. I stayed for 11 years. I was there from the age of 22 until the age of 33, pretty formative time. And I had, the most magical job. I got to ride dirt bikes up into the mountains every day and work with farmers. And we were organizing farmers into co-ops. And it was an amazing journey. And I was living with the poorest of the poor. Our farmers, on average, had 1 acre of land each. And they were trying to grow a little bit of coffee so they could sell that for cash to buy rubber boots and barbed wire and things they couldn't produce on the farm. And then they grew their own food. They grew their own corn and their own beans. Typically, they'd have an avocado tree in the front yard, a mango tree in the backyard. It was a very kind of holistic approach to survival and very typical of small farmers even to this day around the world. And one of the things that I learned from that experience was that a small farmer standing alone does not have the economies of scale or the capital to be able to tap into more lucrative markets in the cities or much less globally speaking. So our coffee farmers were selling their coffee beans for pennies on the pound to local middlemen who preyed on them and were part of reproducing a cycle of poverty, a generational cycle of poverty. And after being there for a while, I came to realize that we had to find a way to organize farmers to tap into the market. And kind of by accident, in the summer of 1990, I heard about fair trade, which was up and running in Europe. There wasn't anything happening here in the U.S., but in Europe, there was this growing fair trade movement, and their slogan was trade, not aid. Their philosophy was farmers don't need our charity. They just need a fair price for all their hard work, for their harvest. I thought that was pretty cool. And so I organized Nicaragua's first fair trade co-op. We started with 20 families the first year, and by the fourth year, we had 3,000 coffee-growing farmers all over the northern part of Nicaragua, growing high-quality coffee, delivering it to a mill that we had hired. We processed the coffee. We sold it direct, jumping over the middlemen, capturing the value that others typically captured, and getting a premium from the fair trade buyers for that coffee. This is not an exaggeration. We were getting our farmers 10 times more than what the local middlemen were paying. The local price at that time was 10 cents a pound. The fair trade buyers were paying us $1 a pound. And so that extra money meant our farmers could stay on the land. No one was packing their bags and immigrating north. They were staying on the land. They were keeping their kids in school. So here's something y'all may know. School is free in pretty much every country that I've ever been to. But in many countries, if you don't have shoes, you're not allowed into school. So what we realized at that time was that generations of kids couldn't go to school because they didn't have shoes. Their families couldn't afford shoes, or they couldn't afford the school books or the notebooks. It was essentially a $200 a year per kid challenge. So with that fair trade money, we set up scholarship programs, $200 per kid per year. And we kept a whole generation of kids in school, not only through grade school, but on to high school and eventually on to college. We ran health programs and did vaccination programs in the communities. We reforested the hillsides that had been deforested a generation later by big lumber companies. We invested in quality. We invested in productivity. We taught farmers how to raise more coffee, more food on their land. We started the first organic program, and most of our farmers got certified organic. In short, all of this progress in terms of both production and social and environmental conditions, and here's the punchline, thanks to nobody's charity, right? It was simply based on this direct market link and getting a fair price for this amazing coffee that we were producing. And that, as you might guess, yielded this amazing dividend, you know, in terms of the hope and the pride and the dignity and the self-reliance of the farmers that I was working with. It was extraordinary. It changed my life. It inspired me to come back to the U.S. and start Fairtrade USA, to borrow the experience from Europe and see if we could adapt it and innovate it and expand it here in North America. And I thought I'd do that for a few years and then go back to the mountains of Nicaragua where I belong. And that was 26 years ago. And here we are, still chugging along. So the organization that I started, Fairtrade USA, is a nonprofit. Our mission is to improve the lives of farmers and workers around the world and to protect the environment. And we do that by developing a standard and then auditing and certifying compliance with that standard. So, you know, fair trade is a philosophy, if you will. It's a movement, but it's also a rigorous 200-point checklist of social, labor, and environmental criteria that farms and factories agree to adhere to. So you know the organic standard. In some ways, it's very similar to that. And those farms and factories get it audited and certified. And when they pass their certification, then they can sell to buyers that are in our program, to retailers and to brands, and they get a premium. They get a small premium on every transaction, which allows them to invest in the community. So that's our role, to develop the standard, to audit and certify against the standard. We also have farmer training programs. We educate consumers. And so in many ways, I would say Fairtrade USA is kind of at the center of this broader fair trade movement that includes companies, consumers, and producers around the world. Here are a couple of numbers to share with you. We're certifying today more than 40 different product categories, from coffee and cocoa to tea and sugar, coconut water, herbs and spices. We moved into fresh produce over 12 years ago. We certify, I don't know, dozens of different produce items. More recently, we've expanded into seafood. We're certifying seafood and dairy. And also in the world of manufacturing, we're certifying apparel and home goods, and most recently a deal with Elf Beauty. We're certifying cosmetics, and anything basically that's produced in a factory, we are now certifying. So it's been a kind of big evolution of our program to go from sustainable ag, where we have always played, into now the world of sustainable manufacturing. We work with almost 2,000 great brands and retailers. You know, in the retail world, we work with Sprouts, we work with Walmart, Whole Foods, Kroger, Albertsons, Safeway, Trader Joe's, Costco, Sam's Club, and we've seen the growth of our private brand business grow dramatically in the last 5 to 10 years, especially in products like coffee and cocoa, which have you know, demonstrably higher incidence of child labor and issues around worker well-being. And so, for example, in the coffee industry, there was a Sustainable Coffee Challenge that was put out a number of years ago, you know, asking the industry to step up and do something around the sourcing of their coffee. And I'm just really proud of the retail community and how supermarkets stepped up to... That's not me, is it? That's not a shut the hell up, Paul, and sit down. No, still got a few minutes. I'm really proud of the retail community and how you all have stepped up to embrace fair trade and Rainforest Alliance and other models of ethical sourcing. We have great programs. For example, Sam's Club, now 100% of their private brand coffee is fair trade. Target, Kroger, Costco, on and on, retailers have not just dabbled in fair trade, but actually made it kind of a foundation of their approach to responsible sourcing in coffee and now increasingly in other products as well. We do a lot to educate and activate consumers. We now have 67% consumer awareness of that Fair Trade certified label. So that's third behind organic and non-GMO. And I'm really proud of that because I believe that our efforts depend, at the end of the day, not just on companies embracing ethical sourcing, but on activating the consumer to reward you for that work, right? If the consumer buys the product, we win. If the consumer doesn't know what you're doing, then she has no way to reward you. Jack talked a little bit a minute ago about storytelling and the importance of storytelling. We too believe that through storytelling, we can energize consumers to vote with their dollars for products that have impact in one way or another. So we're proud of that effort to raise consumer awareness, and that's very much been in partnership with the industry in terms of telling the story. Probably the most important indicator of impact that we have is the number of dollars that flow back to the communities that we work with every year by virtue of this small fair trade premium on every unit sold. We track that, we audit that, and we track how communities choose to spend that money. And through the end of last year, cumulatively, we have delivered $1.2 billion in impact back to over 1 million farmers in 50 countries around the world. So, you know, on a good day, I wake up and I feel proud of all that we've done. And on most days, I wake up and I feel like we're just getting started. 1 million families served in a world where, according to the World Bank, 2 billion people are trying to survive on $2 a day, right? If our mission is to improve the livelihood of farmers and workers around the world, then 1 million families served is pretty good, but it's just a start. So let me share a couple of lessons learned, and then I'm curious to hear what your questions are. You know, I think when I think about the fair trade movement and the ethic and the larger kind of responsible sourcing or ethical sourcing movement, I think one conclusion that we have drawn is that this is a macro trend, and sustainability is a macro trend. Yes, there's been some pushback in the last few years around ESG reporting. Yes, there's been some pushback from, you know, those who think that companies should only be delivering profits to shareholders. But that's dinosaur thinking, yo. Sustainability is not going to stop. This is a macro trend. So feel reassured that what you're working on, what we're working on, is the wave of the future. The second thing I'll say is that, and you all probably know this, but I'll say it anyway, social and environmental sustainability go together. You can't do one and not work on the other. I mean, we've seen the climate crisis. Who does it affect first? Who does it affect the most? It affects the poor. Social and environmental challenges go together. And, you know, I would argue over the last 30 years, a lot of companies have focused first and foremost on environmental sustainability, whether it's packaging or energy or carbon neutrality. And that's cool. It's really encouraging me to see more and more commitments coming out around worker well-being and farmer livelihoods. And the conversation around living wage is increasing. And you know, we see that especially in the manufacturing industry with companies like Patagonia and J.Crew and Gap and other companies that we work with asking about living wage. And so I think, you know, when we think about sustainability, and I'm sure you already know this, we think about it holistically in terms of social and environmental challenges. The third thing I'd say is that sustainability and ethical sourcing in many companies in the past has been seen as a cost. And I think we often struggle to create value to justify the cost. And so I'm really curious and excited about value creation as a way to drive home this notion that a sustainable business or sustainability is a more successful business model. We see value creation in ethical sourcing in a couple of ways. One, in terms of mitigating reputational risk. You know, a lot of these products come from communities and countries where child labor is common, or where traffic labor is common, or where deforestation is against the law but unchecked. And so we've seen the impact that ethical sourcing, responsible sourcing, and whatever, guys, whether it's certified or driven by a company itself, we've seen how that transparency and traceability up and down the supply chain can help mitigate the risk of a scandal in the supply chain. And I think that's value creation. Lowering reputational risk is value creation. I think sustainable supply chains and supply chain reliability is value creation. I know we have all experienced the disruption of supply chains, especially since COVID, with, you know, coffee countries running out of containers and shipping disruptions and all the things. And so what we're finding is that a more responsible supply chain, or a more responsible approach to sourcing, where essentially we're taking care of those upstream producers, those farmers and workers at the beginning of the supply chain, that leads to better outcomes for the firm. It leads to more reliability. It leads to higher quality. We did a test with a major retailer a couple of years ago on tomatoes. We certified about 10% of this retailer's total tomato production. And we tracked a series of indicators, including worker retention. And what we found was that on the fair trade farms, the retention of workers went up to more than 85%, where the industry average in the Mexican tomato industry at the time was around 40%. So when farms are able to retain their workers, it means they're not spending as much money on recruitment. They're not spending as much money training new workers. So productivity goes up, cost goes down, and that ends up benefiting everyone in the supply chain. So that's an example when I talk about value creation through supply chain reliability. That's an example of the things that we're seeing through sustainable sourcing that benefit everyone, including ultimately the retailer at the end of the chain. And the other thing, the obvious difference, I would say, or area of value creation is in brand differentiation. And I think that's one of the reasons why many private brands in the retail space in coffee have switched to fair trade, because they see a way to differentiate those brands from others, from national brands who are not doing or who are not talking in the same way about their approach to sourcing. So brand differentiation and increased sales, I think, is a way to derive value from responsible sourcing. So I hope that's helpful. I want to tell a quick story. I asked the question about inspiration because I really believe that in this revolution that we're in, this 50-year revolution that we're in, as we change capitalism from extractive to sustainable and regenerative, the inspiration that we find in our work is essential to being able to run this marathon, because it's a marathon. And I find inspiration in the stories of the lives of the people that we work with. And I want to share one with you. I was in Ecuador a few years ago visiting a rose farm in the mountains of Ecuador. This farm sells to most major retailers here in the U.S. They're way up in the mountains. They produce really high-quality roses in a greenhouse environment. It's mostly a female workforce. And I was visiting with some buyers from a couple of different supermarket chains, and we had a chance to hear about life kind of before and after fair trade certification. And one of the big things in the fair trade standard for roses is worker safety and health, because the industry tends to use a lot of pesticides to keep insects from damaging the roses. And this is a greenhouse environment, again, so they're spraying pesticides in an environment where the wind is not really there to blow it away. And traditionally, typically in the industry, there were very few protocols around when workers could go back into those greenhouses. So the norm in the industry was exposure. The women who worked cutting and trimming those roses were historically exposed to high levels of toxic chemicals. The rates of birth defects and cancer in the rose industry in Ecuador was 4 times the national average. So this was one of the problems that we tackled in our standard, and we just implemented, first of all, a ban on some of the most toxic chemicals that were being used because there were alternatives, and then implementing worker safety and health measures that included lots of training, protective equipment, and a lockdown protocol for a certain number of hours, depending on the product that was sprayed in the greenhouse. A lockdown protocol where literally the doors of the greenhouse would be locked so that people couldn't go in there until the dust had settled, so to speak, which typically would be 12 hours and sometimes 24. So I remember sitting with a woman named Johanna Garcia and her colleagues, and they were telling us about how things have changed and how they feel safer and, frankly, more respected. They feel like their lives are cared for thanks to these new measures around worker safety and health. And, you know, it was kind of amazing to look around the room and see a group of workers talk about feeling respected, talk about feeling cared for. It was pretty exciting. And then they started talking about what they'd done with the Fair Trade Premium, which is this, in the case of roses, a penny a stem, which the workers get to manage, and they get to assess what their challenges are, and they get to vote on what projects they're going to implement with those funds every year. And this is a workforce that works 6 days a week, and so they have their Sundays off. And no one in this community can afford a washing machine, so they all wash their clothes in the river on Sunday. So every one of these ladies sitting around the table, you know, they, for years, had spent their Sundays ankle deep in the river washing the family's clothes. And so one of the things that they had voted for a couple of years before our visit was building a laundry house so they could have their laundry done while they worked. And so the owner loved the project. The owner of the farm donated a piece of land. The workers, with their Fair Trade Premium, built the laundry house. They bought the machines. They hired a couple of people to work in there. And all this was done with the Fair Trade Premium. All this was done with the money that consumers and retailers are paying, this little bit extra that's going back to the workers. And they have a small charge to cover operating expenses, so they pay a little bit, but mostly it's subsidized by the Fair Trade Premium. So the workers can drop off their bundle of dirty laundry any day of the week, and in the morning, and then in the afternoon they come back and it's washed and folded and ready to go. And what Johanna said to us was, thanks to this laundry house, we got our Sundays back. Thanks to Fair Trade, we got our Sundays back. That was a powerful moment for me. You know, I can imagine what a difference in the lives of these women and their families and their kids to be able to not have to spend Sunday mornings ankle deep in the river, be able to be with their families. And that is one of thousands of stories that we can all tell through the amazing work that we're doing around responsible sourcing and around sustainability in general. And those kinds of stories are the ones that make consumers feel like they can vote with their dollars for a better world, which I believe at the end of the day is what's going to support the success of everything we're doing. So I want to thank each and every one of you for being a revolutionary, for being a pioneer in this great transition of capitalism. And thank you for the inspiration that you give to me every day. We out of time?
No, we got time. We got time.
Chris says we have time.
Thank you, Paul. I want to ask a question first. So I know you're working on a book. Tell us about the book.
Oh, thank you. So actually, I went on a sabbatical this summer. We have a sabbatical policy at Fairtrade USA. After 7 years, you get to take a 6-week sabbatical. In 26 years, I'd never taken one. So I took a 6-week sabbatical this summer and came back and quit my job. So be careful, don't take a sabbatical. And so I'm the founder of Fairtrade USA. I handed over the reins as CEO about a month ago. I'm finishing the year at the organization. And then next year I'm going to promote a book that I just finished. It comes out in April. The title is Every Purchase Matters. If you Google Every Purchase Matters, it'll come up on Amazon. You can pre-order today. And the book is in part about what I just talked about. It's about the fair trade movement, but also this bigger concept of responsible sourcing and how lessons learned and how to bring it into business in a way that not only helps preserve the environment and help farmers and workers, but also deliver value to business.
Cool. Sounds exciting. We look forward to it. Questions for Paul? Anybody? No. Then
Come on, y'all, give me one.
Not a question, but first of all, kudos on helping 1 million people. That is just very tremendous.
Thank you.
I think everybody in this audience strives to do something that they're passionate about, and we can all see that passion in you and the impact you've created. So really inspiring and well done.
Thank you.
Julie?
I think there's a lot of storytellers in this room. I'm curious what you've learned about storytelling around the mission work that you've been doing that you could share with us, because think about as we're telling all the stories.
What have I learned about storytelling? First of all, I don't use PowerPoint. Although I think I could bring the faces, like if I had an image of Johanna, showing you that wash house might have brought to life the story. So I do think there's a role in our meeting rooms, in our boardrooms, and on stage for images around storytelling to bring it to life. I think the big question is, how can we tell the story to consumers in a way that is accessible and easy, and that moves folks to action by helping them see the difference that they're making. We know that people spend an average of 15 seconds in the coffee aisle. So I don't know, point of purchase signs and storytelling may be a way to move the needle. We're experimenting with that with some of our partners, trying to figure out if signage will motivate the purchase behavior. It may be, though, that QR codes that take folks on the package that take folks to the story once they're home, right? I think we read the cereal box an average of 7 times before we finish the box of cereal, right? So there's real estate on packaging, and now technology is making it easier and easier to storytell. Jack mentioned pasture-raised eggs. One of my favorite brands in that space is Vital Farms, and Vital Farms has a QR code where you can visit the chicken farm and see those hens running around happy. And so I think technology is going to dramatically enable the storytelling through the products themselves. And I think consumers' expectations about that are going to go through the roof. I have a millennial son and a Gen Z daughter, and they both expect companies to do the right thing, and they're hungry to know, what the impact is. So I think the advent of technology and social media and the fact that everyone has a cell phone is just going to increase consumers' expectations of us around delivering a story that, that helps them, you know, at the very least know that they did no harm when they bought a bar of chocolate or a T-shirt or whatever it is.
Oh, but you created a brand, essentially. I'm not even sure you knew you were creating a brand, but you created a brand that was built on telling authentic, small, personal stories. It's not about save the planet, right? It's about the farmers.
Yep.
That's where my 20-year-old's going to care,
Yes.
right? Tell me about that, the real thing.
Yeah.
So I think it's exciting. Very good. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.